Okay. Okay. So, we're a little bit ahead of the game. We're going to start looking at methods today. Okay? And what week are we in? So the midterm was week 7. That was, or week 8. So that was last week. So we have today 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more classes. So the last class I'll dedicate to review. Okay, so that'll be preparation for the midterm. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign your second assignment today in the lab. Okay, and you guys can get started on that. Just have to do some checking just to make sure that it doesn't ask anything of you guys that we haven't done yet. So I'll hand that out to you in the lab. I'll post it on eCentennial, and we'll discuss it a little bit before you guys get started with the lab. Okay? Okay. So let's today we're going to learn about methods. Okay? So I uploaded the course, the notes for today to eCentennial. So you can download them and follow along. Yep. Question 9? Okay, just for, okay, do you want to look at it? Question 9. Oh, okay. Yep. Okay, oh, so the comparison, it's down here. Okay, so less than, greater than, equal to. I checked, I went through. If you didn't have exactly that, I went through and so if you use the symbols, that's fine too. I gave you your marks. If not, let me know. Phone's off, guys. If I didn't give you your mark and you had the right symbols, let me know. I'll fix it. Okay? But automatically the system would pick up the words, but I went through by hand and checked if you had the symbols as well. Okay? So let me know if that wasn't correct. Right? So remember, it's less than, greater than, equal to, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, or not equal to. Okay? Okay. So the first thing I want you guys to do is so get a new forms project going. Create a form with a button and a text box. Okay? And let me know when you are there. What's that?
Methods, right? I'm just going to take the whole.
Sure, yeah, we're going to learn about methods today. So actually, I'm going to create a new project and just put it in a proper...
Yeah, I remember learning Java last year.
Methods. Yeah, it's the same thing. That's what we're going to learn about today. Methods in C#. Okay. So, and actually, let's. So we want a text box. Let's drop this guy in here, and we want it to be a multi-line text box. So I'm going to click on my text box, go over to multi-line property, change it to true, and then I'm going to expand it like so. Okay. And then I'm going to put a button here. And then I'm going to double click to edit its method. So today we're going to learn about methods. And actually, you know, I mentioned earlier in the year, sometimes it can be difficult to teach intro programming because you kind of have to know everything at once, right? It's like, because what I had to do in a way is build the roof for you guys before we built the foundation in a way. Because you've been using methods all along. You may not have known it, but we've been using methods in C#. Okay, and I haven't really explained it much because I'm going to explain it now. And so you didn't really need to know too much about it in order to use them. Okay, so can anyone here, looking at this code, so this should look familiar to you. Can anyone? So first, do you think is there any example of a method here? Any from just without any knowledge? Can you guys maybe, without even me telling you what a method is? This one? Oops. Yep, you're right. That is a method. Okay? So a method is it's an encapsulated series of instructions. Okay? It's a package of instructions. So let's say, for example, we write some code that adds two numbers together. Okay? We write a couple of lines of code. But let's say now that in our program, there's many places in our code where we need to add two numbers together. Right? And let's say, for example purposes, that it takes you 10 lines of code to add two numbers together. Okay? So instead of, let's say you need to add two numbers in your program, you need to do that in 20 places in your program. Okay? So rather than copying those 10 commands and putting them in 20 places all throughout your code, what you do instead is you put them, you give them a label, you group them together and you give them a label. So let's say, for example, we had command 1, right, command 2, command 3, command 4, okay? And so these commands all together, they add up a number. Okay? So rather than copying it, so let's say I need it here, and I need it here, and I also need it there. So rather than having 4 copies, what I'm going to do is I'm going to encapsulate these series of commands and by giving it a name. So I'm going to call this function, I'm going to call it add two numbers. And then I'm going to encapsulate these commands just like an if statement with some braces. Okay? So now, anywhere in my program, if I want to run these 4 commands, all I have to do is call this, add two numbers. So I just say add two numbers. And then I could, down here, I could say add two numbers again. It's like a variable in that it allows you to, well, I don't know if it's, like, how do you mean? How is it like a variable?
Like, when you have a code, like, if you assign a variable, then you can just write the variable. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So rather than referencing the number all the time, yeah, that's right. So then you reference the variable name rather than the value. So it's the same thing. Rather than retyping all these commands, okay, we just call this.
Recycle the code.
Exactly. And there's a couple of reasons to do that. One reason is to save typing, but that's actually a small reason, right? The majority of development time is not you actually typing on the keyboard. That's not what takes the long. It's the actual design and later debugging. Okay, so one of the other reasons you do that is, so let's say you, instead of having this function and then you're referencing the function. Let's say you have these copies all throughout your code. And then let's say sometime you realize, oh shoot, I messed up. This isn't the way you add two numbers together. Instead of command 3, I need command 5 there. Okay? So now what do we have to do? Now we have to find each place where we put command 3 and go through and change it. There's command 3, right? Whereas if we just use the function and we called the function, we only have to change it in one place. Right? It's so much faster that way. And it's less error prone because you probably, let's say if you had 20 of these in your code, you'll probably forget to change 1 or 2 just by mistake, right? So what we do is we put our commands into a method. Okay? Now, the other thing about a method is that you can pass information into a method. Okay? Parameters, exactly. So there's something called, we already looked at this a little bit. We already looked at, in your assignments and in the labs, we looked at variable scope. Right? Remember we talked about global variables and local variables? So let's say this is a function. Okay? If you declare a variable in here, it's only accessible to commands that are in between these braces. Okay? So if we want information, if we want to pass information into here, what we have to do is, so there are ways to get information in and out of our function. Okay? So think of a function as like a, let's see, where's my... Think of a function as like a black box, like this. Okay? This is your function. So with your function, what you're going to have is you're going to have some inputs. And you're going to have an output. So let's say your function was, let's get rid of this. Give me delete. How do we erase? Where's my eraser? Can I select it? How do I select though? Select. Oh, I have to draw a rectangle, like so. Okay. So let's say our function is make bread. Okay? I love bread. So what are the inputs to the function make bread? How do we make bread? Has anyone here made bread before? Yeah. So we have, well, flour, right? What else do we have? Yeah, milk. What else do we have? Eggs. Yep. Eggs. And what else? And yeast. We need yeast. Right? Haven't any of you ever used a bread maker at home? You know, you little things, you put all the stuff in, you press a button, right? That's like your function. This is your bread maker. Okay? So now we have yeast, that's another input, and eggs, that's another input. So we have 4 inputs into our function. And these inputs, these are like parameters. I'm going to show you in a second. And then what comes out of our function? Bread, exactly. Bread comes out. So this, what comes out, that's our return value. That's what it spit out of the function. Okay, so the function, usually when we use functions, we don't care what's inside. Okay, in computer science, what we call this is a black box. Okay, that means it's this box and some magic stuff happens inside. It's not actually magic. There's real stuff going on, but for our intents and purposes, we consider it magic. We don't care really what happens. Right? Like remember when you used methods, you used the conversion methods. Right? You use convert dot to int. That's a method. You used it. Do you have any idea how it worked? Not really. Because it's a black box. We don't really care. We assume that whoever made C#, right, Microsoft, that they implemented that function correctly. Sometimes we can assume that, but most of the times we can't. Okay, so these things here, these are our input. They're called parameters, or sometimes attributes. This thing here, this is our function name, and this here, this is our return value. Okay, so let's go back to, maybe we'll just go to actual C# now. Okay, so let's go back to C#. So we already have a method here. This is a method. Okay. Can someone tell me what the method name is? Button 1 click. That's the name of the method. That's how we can call the method. Okay? So this right here, this is the return type. Okay? So in our case here, what we're getting is bread. Okay? So you could consider, let's call that type food. Okay? It's food. And so we're getting a type food, and the specific value of that type is bread. So, but usually in C#, the return values are variables, right? Ints, doubles, strings, or maybe even objects. Okay? So what this means is that this method doesn't return anything. It doesn't return anything. It doesn't result in anything. Okay? It just, the input goes in and it's processed, and that's sort of it. It doesn't return anything. Okay? So, this method, if we look inside, let's look inside our files. Remember when I said when we create a form, C# creates a lot of code for us automatically. Okay? So if we go into our designer view, okay, we click form1.designer, and we go into here, and we look here. So here's our button variable. So what we've done here is we are referencing here. We are referencing our method. What we're saying is when button 1 is clicked, see, this is the click event. What we want to run is this method called button 1 click. That's what we want to run when we click the button. Okay? So we've already seen that. So what we've already done this. So let's in here, we'll put in message box dot show, and then we'll put here you clicked me. Actually, we need to do strings. Okay? So here's another method. We're calling another method. So from methods, within methods, you can call other methods. Right? So what's the other method that we're calling here? Dot show. Dot show, that's a message. That's a method. And it's a black box method. We don't understand the code underneath. We don't really care about that. That's the beautiful thing about computers. That's why we can have computers that are so complex that virtually there probably isn't a single human being on Earth that fully understands this computer. Fully. There isn't a single human. Right? What we do is we encapsulate things. So one person, they worked at the very lowest level, right? With the little switches in their computer. They were actually tinkering with that. Then what they did is they created things like functions. They put a layer on top. So then nobody has to deal with that layer anymore, right? Then we have other functions. Then you can build another layer on top. So you guys, like back in the 50s when computers were first being invented, people actually had to put their hands on the computer components, rewire them, okay? But they did that once. Then they put a layer on top, and now nobody has to do that anymore. Now we work at another layer, okay? It's the same thing with show. Rather than imagine if you had to write 1,000 lines of code just to get some text to appear on the screen. It would take you forever to program an application that can do anything, right?
Presets, right?
What's that?
Presets.
Presets?
Like everything is already done for you.
Well, a lot of the lower level stuff, so you can put together the components, right? So imagine when you're building a house. The bricklayer doesn't go and get the stuff out of the mine. He doesn't mine the stone, right? He gets this unit, a brick that other people have already assembled for him, and he just puts it together and creates a house. Okay? Same thing with functions. That's how it works. Okay? So let's try running this. I think we've already looked at an example like this. So now if we click this button, it's going to run this method, and it's going to run messagebox.show. I think that should be, we've already done that. Okay? But now what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that will actually call message. We're going to create our own message box function. Okay? Maybe we don't want to type all this. Okay? So what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to do when we define a function is we need to define its return type. Okay? And since for our first example, we're not going to have a return type. It's not going to return a value. Okay? So what we type when we don't want a return type is void. That's our return type. We're saying we're not going to return anything. Okay? Then the next thing that we're going to write is the name of the method. So let's call our method show. Okay? And then we're going to give it some brackets. And usually in the brackets, this is where we can put arguments or parameters. But we're not going to do that right now. We're not going to have any. Okay? Then inside here, after our method, we're going to put these braces. So this looks familiar to an if statement or a loop, right? So this means that anything in between these brackets will be run when we call this function. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut this, we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to place it here. So now what we can do is we can go in our button 1 click method, and what we're going to do is we're going to call our show method that we just created. Okay? So now if we run it, what's going to happen? The exact same thing. Okay? Because what we're doing, let's step through the code. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here. By clicking here, I'm going to press start to debug. It's going to break. It's going to stop when I click this button. Okay? So now it's stopped here. So see now, this is where we can use these different buttons. Okay? So what we want to do, we don't want to step over, because that'll just run the function. What we want to do is step into. We're going to step into the function. So we're going to click this button or press F11, and now what that's going to do is it's going to jump up, and look now where we are. We're in the show method. Okay? And now I'm going to step into again, and now we're going to step over this method, and we get our message box, and then we return back here, and where is it going to go after it's finished here? Where is it going to jump down? Where? Here? Exactly. So we're going to go to the next line, and now, well, we're here, and then the next line is after the method. Okay? So see how we changed the program flow. We jumped up here, then we jumped back down. Okay? So that's an example of a method without a return type. So we can just call it, and it goes ahead and it does something. So in this case, what it does is it prints a message. Okay? Okay. So now what we want to do, let me just make sure I've been covering what we want to learn about. Hi.
Okay, I did a lab on the computer.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so now let's look at using parameters. Okay. Sorry, if you have to come back later if the computer's in use. Okay. Okay. Come after at 10:30. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so where were we before I was rudely interrupted by my computer? Visual Studio. Okay, back in business. So where was I? So we were talking about attributes. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to be able to pass in some information into our method. Okay. So we'll go back to our button function. Okay. Okay. So what we're going to do, now we have to change, we're going to change our method definition to include one attribute. Okay? And the way we do that, so this is the method definition right here. We're defining what happens whenever you call this method. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell this method, we're going to tell C# that we want to take an attribute of type integer, and it's going to be called number. Okay? So now you'll notice there's an error. Can anyone see? So the error here, if we look here, it says no overload for method show takes 0 arguments. So what that means, it's actually possible to define methods that take different numbers and types of arguments. We're not really going to get too much into that in this class, but it is possible to do that. Okay. So what we're going to do, so it's complaining. It's saying I'm expecting an integer value to be passed into my method. Okay. So let's do that. Let's create an integer here called my variable to be passed, and we'll make it equal 10. Okay? So now what we're going to do, we're going to pass this variable into the method by putting it in here. This is our method call. We're going to put it in between the brackets of our parentheses of our method. Okay? So now what that means is when show is called, it's going to, in here, we're going to have access to a variable called number that then we can use. Okay? So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go here and I'm going to type number. Okay? And we have to convert it to string. Okay? So, what's going to be printed to the screen? Someone said it. 10? How come 10? No, nothing? Okay, so I'm going to get to returning in a minute, but it is still, returning a value is different than displaying a value. That's different. So what we're doing here is we're displaying a value. I'll get to returns in a minute, and you'll see exactly what the difference is. Okay, so let's run it, and then we'll step through the code and see how it works. Okay, so we're going to run it, and then I'm going to click button, and there we get 10. So how did that work? Let's step through it. Let's see how it works. So again, debug with me. Okay, step through the code with me. Click here on this line and put a red dot there. Okay? And now we're going to run the code by clicking start, and as soon as we click our button, it's going to freeze at our breakpoint. Okay? So click there. So now we've frozen here. Okay? So right now my variable to be passed doesn't have a value. Okay? So we're going to step over this, and now you can see my variable, the value is 10. Okay? So now we're going to pass that value into this method. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go step into this method. So where are we going to jump up to now if I click this button? We're going to jump up into here, into show, because we called the show method. Okay? So now, look at here. Look at the value of number. What's the value of number? 10. Why is it 10? Because that's the value I passed in. Okay? So now when I press F10, and then again, now we're going to have, so number is 10, and it prints 10. Okay? Let's look at it this way. What if I did this? What is it going to print now? 12? Who votes for 12? Okay, those of you who don't say 12, why don't you think it's 12? Because what? But I didn't actually pass it. Look what I did. So I declared a variable and gave it a value, but then I left it alone. I passed in the hard-coded value of 12. So what if I did this? Copied this, put it in here, change this to 3. What will print now? 3. Okay, what if I went in here and changed this to this? 50. Okay? Okay, great. So now let's look at how do we do this with 2 attributes. So far we've only passed 1 number into the method. Let's do it with 2. So the way we do that is we just put a comma here and we put in another variable. So let's call this, we'll call this one number 2 and this one number 1. Okay? So remember, these can be any type. You can pass in, and it doesn't have to be the same. It's not like an array. Each attribute could be, one could be an integer, one could be a string, one could be a double, one could be an object, etc., etc. Okay? Now that being said, it's usually, if you're passing into a method more than 4 or 5 attributes, that's bad practice. Yep. Multi-dimensional? No, that's for arrays. I wouldn't call it, no, I wouldn't, that word isn't used for methods. Multi-dimensional, no. What was I just saying? Sorry? Yeah, so if you have more than 4 or 5, 6 is the upper limit. It means that there's something wrong with your design. Okay? There's something wrong. You need to redesign your system because you shouldn't be passing in that much. Okay? If you do really need to pass a lot of information into a method, what you can do is pass an array. So you put all the values into an array, and then you pass that single array into your method. Okay, but let's look at it. So we've changed the definition of show. Okay, and let's change because we're going to change what it does now. So let's change the name of our method. Let's call it add and show. Okay, so down here, look, it's show. Our method call here show. It's complaining. It's giving an error. Why is it giving it an error? I changed the name. Yep, that's one. Okay, so let's match the name. What else about it? It's still going to give me an error. What? 1 instead of 2, right? So what I have to do now is I have to give it at least 2 numbers. Okay? And here this is complaining as well because I changed this value from number to number 1. Okay? So now what we'll do is let's create a local variable inside our method called int sum equals 0. Okay? And now let's say sum equals number 1 plus number 2. And then we're going to display the sum. So what is going to appear on the screen? $90. Right? Well, let's step through it. Step through it with me, okay? So let's put our breakpoint here. Okay? and we'll run it. Click the button. Okay, so the program has frozen here. Okay, so we're setting this variable to equal 3, but we're not using it. That's the end of it. And then we're going to press this button, or F11. It's going to step into the method. Okay, so now we're up here, right? What's number 1? What's that going to equal? 50. What's number 2 going to equal? 40. Okay, because that's what we passed in, right? This is the first position, and we passed in a 50, and this is the first position here. So this equals 50. Okay, so now we're coming into the method. So now we have sum equals 0, and now we have 50 and 40, and the sum still 0, and we'll run it. Now it equals 90, and now we're going to display the sum. There we go. Okay. Okay, so that's using a method with 2 attributes or parameters. Okay. So now let's take a look at what return means. Okay. So far we've had a nothing. We haven't returned anything. Okay. So let's change that now. So now we're going to make our method. We want it to return an integer. Okay? So we're going to change this value from a void. We're going to change it to int. Okay? And why is that complaining? Okay. So now what this means is, we're going to get rid of this message box. We're going to get rid of this. Okay? And what we're going to do at the end of our method, because now we're returning something rather than nothing, what it's complaining, see, it's saying not all code paths return a value. So that means the method is not returning a value. So what we have to do is we have to use the keyword return. Okay? And what we're going to return is, so we're going to change the method name. Instead of add and show, we're not going to show anymore. We're just going to add. Okay? So we're going to take away that and change the method to add. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to return the sum. Okay? So what does that mean now? What does that mean? Let's get rid of this. Okay? So we'll get rid of this variable too. So let's create a new integer. We'll call it my sum. And we're going to set it to equal to add 1 and 2. Okay, so what's happening here is, so this method is called, okay, and it jumps up here and it runs the method. Okay, so we're passing in 1 and 2, so numbers 1 and number 2 are equal to 1 and 2. Then we come in here, we add 1 and 2 and put the value in sum, and then we return it. So what that essentially means is that this function turns into what you're returning. So it's like once it runs, it returns into that. Okay? So let's run it. Let's step through it. We'll put a breakpoint here, and we're going to click Start. So now I'm going to click my button, and so now we're here. Now if I step into the method, we're going to jump up here. Okay? So now number 1 is equal to 1. Number 2 is equal to 2. Now we're going to go into the next line. So sum equals 0. Now sum equals 3, because we've added number 1 and added number 2, and that equals 3. Now we're returning the sum, right? That's like remember my black box, my bread maker? We're sending the bread back now. So this is our flour, and this is our milk, and this is we've mixed it. This is our mixing and baking, and now this is we're giving it back now. Somebody gave me a bunch of ingredients. I ran the function, and now I'm returning the bread. So this is the bread now. Sum 3. That's the result. So now we go back into our method, back down here. So once I run this, what is my sum going to equal? 3. Exactly. 3. Because the function add has returned its value back into here. Okay? So now what we could do is we could say message box show and we could say my sum. Oh yeah. Okay? And now that will display 3. The other thing we can do is we could put this directly into here. So think of it, this here is almost like this. Okay? It's just that, so now we can copy this and paste it in here. Okay? Because this thing becomes what it returns. Right? So after we run it, it's like we did this. Right? So this gets returned here. So this here has the equivalent value of this, and type. So see, we can say, I want whatever the result of add is, dot toString. So whatever the result of the add is, it's going to be an integer. Convert that to a string. Okay? So here's what I want you guys to do. I'm going to give you a little task. I want you to create a function called multiply. Okay? That returns the value of two numbers multiplied together. Okay? And it should return a type double. Okay? So let's revisit scope. Okay? So I have declared a variable inside my add method called sum. Okay? Could I do this? Could I say sum equals 10? Could I do that? Visual Studio is giving you a hint. I can't do that. Why can't I do that? Why can't I access this variable here? What's that?
You have variables set to number 1 plus number 2, right?
Yeah.
So that's why how will you show both the things?
Both the things? No.
Like sum is actually sum of first number and second number, right?
Yeah.
But you want to directly show it as 10. So first it will consider the sum of those two numbers.
No. Well, that's not why this doesn't work. Because it's a local variable. Local to what? This function. Because I've declared this variable inside this method, it's only accessible inside the method. Everything, this is another method. It's outside. How about this? What if I put it here? Is that allowed? No. No, it's not. Because it's only accessible by commands inside the method. Okay? Now, what if I did this? So at the top of my method, I said this. Int number equals 0. Now, if I go here, could I say inside my add method, if I say message box dot show and I say number, is that going to work? It is going to work? Why? It's a global variable. Excellent. Because I've defined it outside of all of these methods. Okay? Now what about if I did... let's see here. What about... okay, let's do this. Inside my method, I'm going to define another method. So I'm going to say void show. Okay? Whoops. And I'm... oh no, wait, is that going to work? Why isn't that expected? No, I suppose we can't do that. Okay, never mind. You should be able to do that. Let me just, 1 second. Let me just look at my notes. Should be able to define a method in method. Yeah, no, we can't do that. Okay. My mistake. Okay, so let me think more about... I want to test you more on scope. Okay, so far I think you're okay with scope. Okay, so we looked at local variables, global variables, single argument, we looked at multiple arguments, we looked at returning a value, writing a method that returns a value, passing an array. Okay. Here's one. Here's a. Is there a printer in here? Somewhere? Where? Where? Okay. Excellent. So, I'm going to teach you guys a concept that's. Hey, can someone print me Steve, does anyone have two blank pieces of paper? Anybody? It's okay. I can just print something. Anybody? Yeah, 2. Is that it? That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the difference between passing. So we've seen how we pass. Variables into a method. Okay. But there's actually 2 ways of passing a method. My marker. Just use a dry erase. Okay. So there are 2 methods of passing a variable into a method. Okay? The first one is pass by value. Okay? The second is pass by reference. Okay? So let me demonstrate the difference between each, and then we'll talk about it in code. So let's say these sheets of paper, these are our variables. Okay? So this is an int, And on this int, we're going to give it a value of 5. Okay? So I'm the main method, right? I'm like if we look here, I'm this here, right? Form like this whole method. I'm the main method, okay? And you're a sub method. You're like add, okay? So in the first instance, so let's say I declare this variable, okay, 5. In the first instance, if we pass by copy or pass by value, it's actually kind of the same thing, but the term is pass by value. Okay? If I'm going to pass this by value, what happens is I get another sort of temporary variable. Okay? I copy the value to the variable, and I give you this value. Okay? I still have this, and you have a copy of the variable. That's pass by value. Okay? Now let's say you're the function, and you change, let's say your function is to add 5. Add 5. Okay? So do that. Add 5. So 10. Yeah, so write 10 on the other side. Write 10, right? So he's changing the value of his copy, but my copy stays the same because I passed by value. All I didn't pass the actual variable, I just passed the number. So even though the sub method changed the value, the original doesn't change. Okay? That's passed by value. That's what we're doing here. We're passing by value. Okay? Now, let's look at pass by reference. So give me that back. Okay? So this is going to be garbage now. So now what we're going to do, we're going to pass by reference. So I'm the main thread. I'm passing this to you, but I'm going to hang on to it. I'm not letting go. You can have it, but I'm keeping it. I'm not making a copy. I'm giving you access to this variable now. So now add 10. Now add 5. So it equals 10, right? Yeah, 10. You get the idea. So now I take this back. The original value has changed because I passed by reference, right? I gave you a reference to the actual value, okay? And you changed it. Whereas the first time, oops, I guess I shouldn't have thrown this out. The first time I kept the value and I copied the value and gave you a new copy, and then you changed it. Okay? So when we've been passing in just simple variables, we pass by value. Okay? But now let's look at quickly just sort of the final. I'm going to hand out the test actually at the end of the class, the assignment. But now let's look at passing an array. When we pass an array, we pass by reference. We don't pass by value. Okay? Can anyone? Why might we want to do that? Why might we want to do that? Well, because an array will probably hold many, many, many items. So it's inefficient to make a copy of that. What if you have an array with 1,000,000 items in it? Right? And so to pass it into a method, if I were to make a copy of that, that's taking up a lot of memory that we don't really need to use. Where if I pass a reference, I'm not making a whole new copy. I'm just giving you access, right? So what we can do here is let's go in. So in our button 1 method, in our button 1 click method, what we're going to do is we're going to create an integer array called numbers. Okay? And we can initialize it right off the bat like this. We could say 10, 12, 22, 55, 66. Okay, that's another way to initialize an array. So now we've created our array. We're going to create another method called, so it's going to return a type integer, and we're going to call it add array. Okay? And the argument type will be int an int array, and the value will be, we'll call it my array. What's the problem here? Oh, okay, so for now we'll just return 0. Actually, we don't want to return anything. We're going to change that to void. Oh, yeah. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to call our method add array, and we're going to pass in numbers. Okay, and actually I'm going to throw one more change at you. Instead of add array, let's call it change array. Change array, because we're going to change the values in our array. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, just so we can see everything, is we're going to print our array numbers to the text box. So we're going to use a for loop, int I equals 0 while I is less than numbers.length while I plus plus, and then we're going to say text box 1 dot append text, and we'll say numbers I to string. Okay, so that should print our array in its original condition. So there we have our arrays. Okay. Oops, and we'll get rid of this. Okay, so we've declared an array, given it values, and then displayed the array values by appending them to a text box. So now in our change array function, we're going to go up here, and what we're going to do, we're going to say my array 0 equals 99, and then we'll do this the long way, just so you guys can see what's going on. Change this to 2, 3. So let's change them all to 99. So now what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste this method again, this little this loop, and we're going to print that there. Okay, and let's try it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so can someone explain to me what happened here? Let's look at it. Okay. So, we declared an array. Okay? We gave it 5 numbers. Then we looped through the array and we printed the numbers. Okay? So 10, 12, 22, right? That's the first thing. 10, 12, 22, 55, 66. That's the first loop. Okay? Then we ran this function, change array. And we passed the array into the method. So how are arrays passed into methods? By value or by reference? By reference, right? Because remember, arrays could be really, really big, and you don't want to make a copy if you don't have to. Okay? So what that means is we're passing the actual array into the method. So see now, so we've passed this array numbers. We pass that into our method. Then we go up here into our method. Now we have access to this array through this attribute. Okay? So right now, this my array and numbers are pointing to the same thing, the same area in memory where the values are stored. Okay? So now we're changing all the array slots to 99. Then we return back to our main thread and we print out the array again. But this time the array has been changed, and so we get all 9s now. Okay? So arrays and other complex objects, we're going to look at objects and classes probably towards the end, are always passed by reference. Simple types like integers, doubles, strings, chars, etc., are passed by value. Okay? So make sure you understand the difference between pass by reference and pass by value. Okay? If you wanted to copy it? Yeah, you mean if you didn't want to change the initial... Well, if you didn't want to change... You can still access it, and it won't... Yeah, if you wanted to, you could say something... Like, you could do a for loop and put each value into another array. You could do that. Let me just see if you can pass by value. I think there may be a way to force it by value. I'll have to get back to you on that. But usually you don't. There usually isn't a reason to do that. I usually just pass by reference. Yeah, but you could do that if you want. Okay. So any questions about methods? Right. So methods have a return type. They have a name. They have attributes. They don't have to have attributes, but they can. Right. They return values, although a method doesn't have to return a value. Okay. Simple types are passed by value, and complex types, such as arrays, are passed by reference. Okay. Remember that variables defined inside a method are accessible only inside that method. They're local to that method. Okay? Okay. So, what I'm going to do now is just assign the second assignment. So, let me just post it up.
Sir, can you scroll down?
Sure. Here? What am I doing here? I am creating a new Dropbox, new folder. Assignment 2.